In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the CoreClarity system, which turns the Gallup strengths, the signature themes, into a very powerful and individualized tool. CoreClarity was developed in 2005 when Candace Fitzpatrick, who at the time was taking her master's in organizational development, was attracted to the Clifton strengths because of the insights she gained. But it was also very difficult to use. There are 33,600,000 combinations of those top 5 talent themes. And again, each of those are themes, so they're not tailored. Candace was challenged by her professor to come up with a system that would help make sense of this and make something that's very complex and takes a lot of training into something that was highly intuitive and at the same time very personalized. Candace found that the 34 themes fell into 4 distinct quadrants quite nicely. So I'll introduce you to what she created, which is the CoreClarity Key. And this key is really the key to the system and the key to unlocking this individualized way of interpreting the strengths for you. As you can see, the key is divided into 4 quadrants and 4 colors. Those colors are very helpful in terms of understanding the density of strengths in particular quadrants. I like to refer to these quadrants as either energy fields because of the energy it releases when you're operating in those strengths, or languages, because if you have strengths in those areas, you have an intuitive understanding of what they do. And if you don't, then you don't speak the language naturally, but you can learn how to function in those quadrants, just like going to a country and learning how to be functional in that language. As you look at your CoreClarity Key, you'll notice that the talents are distributed in rank order of how common they are in the global database. The next thing you'll notice is that the CoreClarity Key is divided into halves and then quadrants. So let's take a look at the top half. The top half is called external, and those are strengths that get switched on when you're interacting with people. So we look at the blue quadrant, and those are the intuitive strengths that understand the non-verbal elements that make relationships work well. So this is the relationship quadrant, or it's called connect. It's the blue quadrant. We move over to the right, and that is the magenta quadrant called mobilize. And these are strengths that are intuitive around finding potential in something or someone and wanting to pull that out. So there's a range of strengths from intuitive to connecting to intentionally and deep bonding strengths in the blue. Those tend to be more relationship oriented. And in the magenta, there are 2 sections. One are what we call the soft strengths. Those are the encouraging and positively motivating strengths. And then there are those that we call the hard strengths. Those are the challenging, confrontational, or push to excellence kinds of strengths. So again, both of them have great instincts about people. One is more about the relationship dynamic, those nonverbal cues that make relationships work. So in the magenta quadrant, you can think of it as somebody exuding energy that either uplifts or challenges somebody or a team to higher performance. In the blue, you can think of it as absorbing energy from somebody else and then responding in the different ways. And if you look at each specific strength in this language quadrant, then that gives you a range of how fluent somebody is or how natural that quadrant is to somebody. So now let's look at the bottom half. Those are internal. Think and do. Those are what's happening inside of you, so that trigger and engagement is internally to you. If you have a majority of your strengths in the bottom quadrant, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're an introvert, although it can. What it means is that that energy is internal to you. The bottom left, the green, is called reflect, and those are the strengths that naturally take in information, process, and make decisions. And there's a range. It is the most populated quadrant. And then on the right is the orange called energize. Those are the strengths that naturally drive you to take action or to get something completed or done. So now we have the 4 quadrants. The more strengths that are on that right side, the more the energy is initiating, pushing, driving, what you might call type A. If you look at the left side, the blue and the green, the more the individual is a reflective, advisory, responsive kind of leader, not a driving, forceful, or directive kind of leader. Now these are the tendencies. Already you have a nice framework to look at someone's 5 strengths and begin to see some general tendencies. So let's take this into my pyramid to see a little bit of how we unpack this. As we look at the first page in my coaching packet, we see the CoreClarity Key in the upper right side. That's the reference point. And you can see the blue, the magenta, the orange, and the green. Over on the left-hand circle, it's how my 5 strengths fall into those 4 quadrants. We see 1 stripe or 1 dialect in the blue, 3 in the green, and 1 in the orange. So what you might say is that I'm very fluent in the thinking processing side, the cognitive side, and I have a certain dialect. Relator is my specific dialect, which is one of those deeper, more intentional kinds of relationship strengths. And then I've got 1 orange, which is achiever, which is the dialect that I speak in getting things done, which is basically get things done, check things off the list. And now with this archetype or pattern, you can see I have no strengths in the magenta. Now that's neither good or bad, it just communicates a style. And so the style, if I want to simplify it, with the blue, it's relational, with the green, it's thoughtful, and with the orange, it's reliable. That is called a lifeline leader, or a lead by example kind of leader, behind the scenes, or a servant leader. Now you will have a 1-sheet description of what that looks like, and I'll refer to that in a minute so you can see what that looks like and how to use it. But you can also see I have what I referred to in an earlier video as secondary archetypes. I've got 4 of my strengths in 2 adjoining quadrants. I've got the blue and the green, so that secondary archetype is called a Bridgeneer, we call it a sage. And then I've got the green and the orange. That archetype is called a trailblazer. So when I work with you, I'll walk through your primary and if you have secondary archetypes, what that means and how that gives us a more varied way of understanding you in a personal way. The other thing we do with these strengths, we look at couplets or 2 strengths side by side. And those couplets can either amplify each other or they can modify each other. So an example of amplification is my achiever and strategic. Strategic and achiever both have something in common. They're forward thinking and they're about outcomes, getting things done. So that forms kind of a turbocharge, and we'll talk about what a turbocharge or amplification means. Gives you much greater capacity in that range. Now let's look at 2 strengths that modify each other. My strategic and my relator modify each other. In other words, the people that I tend to be more intentional with, relator is that deep bonding circle of trust kind of strength, tend to be people who are part of my strategic life. People in my business circle, people in my faith circle, people who are significant to me. Whereas if I had another modifier to relator, it might be a broader and more open circle. So these 2 elements, amplification or modifying, help us again tailor this to a great degree. You'll find in the information that we gave you a 1-pager that describes your leadership archetype, and you may also have a couple of additional 1-pagers on your secondary archetype. I recommend that you walk through this and underline the sentences that best capture what you think this looks like on your best day. That again is part of this tailoring process, so that when we come away from the end of our session, that you feel like you've got some real tools that help capture and describe how you operate, what you look like at your best, and how to play to your strengths. So I'm eager for our coaching session together. Each of these is fascinating to me. All the variety in the ways people manifest themselves and how they're wired. And one of my favorite quotes is from Walt Disney. The more you are like yourself, the less you are like anyone else, which makes you unique. And what he went on to say is that we've got too many people who are copies of copies, and we need more originals. My goal and intent is to help you find that original blueprint of you and help you learn how to optimize and play to your strengths on a daily basis. Take care.